And hello everybody, we're going to hit you up with another presidential election. This one, the election of 1860. We are getting close to the Civil War as the Democrats divide along with the country. Who's going to win the presidency, and are we going to get plunged into civil war? Let's find that out right now. Now, as always, we're going to get into the incumbent party, and that is the Democrats. Somewhat. We'll talk about that in just a second. The incumbent president is James Buchanan. He's elected in 1856, and he really has a lackluster presidency. He does things that hastens the coming, that are really unpopular, and it hastens the coming of the Civil War, essentially. He convinced Supreme Court Justice Robert Grier to vote pro-slavery in the Dred Scott decision. Now, Buchanan was what people at that time called a doughface, just like Franklin Pierce, a northerner, but with sympathies to the South. Now, the Dred Scott decision ruled that slaves were not citizens and that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. So, Dred Scott's owner, Mr. Sanford, could take Dred Scott anywhere and he would still be a slave. Now, this decision was so unpopular that it backfired on Buchanan, and it led to Republicans taking control of Congress by the time 1858 rolled around. And by 1860, Buchanan basically just wanted to get out of the White House and go back home to Pennsylvania in one piece. So he decides not to run for a second term. But the Democrats have their own problems. Now, the Democratic National Convention, the Democrats end up splitting in the northern and southern factions, because 51 Southern Democrats, when the convention first meets in April of 1860, 51 Southern Democrats walk out over a platform dispute. The extreme pro-slavery fire eater William Lowndes Yancey and the Alabama delegation left first, followed by Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Texas. 3 of the delegates from Arkansas, and 1 of the delegates from Delaware. Now, the Democrats do put up their slate of candidates, and those candidates are Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas, Kentucky's James Guthrie, Virginia Senator Robert M.T. Hunter, Oregon Senator Joseph Lane, Daniel S. Dickinson of New York, and Tennessee Senator Andrew Johnson. And by the time the 57th ballot rolls around, Stephen A. Douglas was still ahead. Douglas was a moderate on the slavery issue who favored popular sovereignty. So really, in desperation, the convention adjourns. Now, the next time the convention meets, it is in Baltimore. And this time, 110 Southern delegates walk out when the convention refuses to adopt a resolution supporting extending slavery into territories whose voters did not want it. The delegates who were left nominated Stephen A. Douglas for the presidency. Douglas is going to bring along for the ride Herschel V. Johnson of Georgia. So, therefore, the Democrats do split in the northern and southern factions. Now, the northern faction ticket is going to be Douglas and Johnson. Let's see who the southern faction ticket is going to be. Now, the southern faction meets in Richmond. They end up meeting initially in Richmond, and then in Baltimore. They adopted the pro-slavery platform that was rejected in Charleston, and they put up their own slate of candidates. Their own slate of candidates being the sitting Vice President John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, Daniel S. Dickinson of New York, Senator Hunter, Senator Lane, and Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis. And at the end of the day, it is going to be Breckinridge who receives the nomination for president, and Lane who receives the nomination for vice president. So we have our Southern Democratic ticket. Now we're going to get into the Republicans. Now the Republicans, their platform promises not to interfere with slavery in the states, but suggested an opposition to slavery in the territories. They also promised tariffs that would protect industry and workers, a Homestead Act that granted free farmland in the West to settlers, and the funding of a transcontinental railroad. There's no mention of Mormonism, the Fugitive Slave Act, personal liberty laws, or the Dred Scott decision. Now, the Republicans also put up their slate of candidates, and those candidates are Abraham Lincoln of Illinois, New York Senator William Seward, Pennsylvania Senator Simon Cameron, the Governor of Ohio Salmon P. Chase, Missouri's Edward Bates, Supreme Court Justice John McLean of Ohio, Ohio Senator Benjamin Wade, and New Jersey's William L. Dayton, who was the vice presidential nominee for the Republicans in 1856. Sorry that I neglected to mention that in the last video. And at the end of the day, it is going to be Abraham Lincoln who receives the nomination for president, and he's going to bring along for the ride Maine Senator Hannibal Hamlin as his running mate. Now we got our Republican ticket. Now let's take a look at the Constitutional Union Party. So the Constitutional Union Party was formed by remnants of the Whigs, who hoped to stave off Southern secession by avoiding the slavery issue. Their party platform advocated compromise to save the Union, and their slogan was "The Union as it is, and the Constitution as it is." They hold their own national convention, and they put up their own slate of candidates. Those candidates being John Bell of Tennessee, Texas Governor Sam Houston, Kentucky Senator John J. Crittenden, Edward Everett of Massachusetts, William A. Graham of North Carolina, who was the Whig vice presidential nominee in 1852, and William C. Rives of Virginia. At the end of the day, it is going to be John Bell who receives the presidential nomination, and he's going to bring along for the ride Edward Everett as his running mate. Now that we have our four-party tickets, let's do a little bit of campaigning. Now, in the campaigning, both Bell and Douglas claimed that this union would not necessarily follow a Lincoln election. Nonetheless, loyal Army officers in Virginia, Kansas, and South Carolina warned Lincoln of military preparations to the contrary. Secessionists, meanwhile, through their support behind Breckinridge, in an attempt either to force the anti-Republican candidates to coordinate their electoral votes or throw the election into the House of Representatives, where the selection of the president would be made by the representatives elected in 1858. In other words, the Republicans. Before the Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate achieved in 1860 were seated in the new 37th Congress. Mexican war hero Winfield Scott suggested to Lincoln that he assume the powers of a commander-in-chief before inauguration if he was elected president. This election is going to have one of the highest voter turnouts in American history, 81.2%. On election day, exaggerated sectionalism took place, and this is one of the notable things about this election. All 6 presidents elected since Andrew Jackson won re-election had been one-termers, and the last 4 won with a popular vote under 51%. And with that in mind, let's get to the results. Abraham Lincoln is going to win this election. Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans are going to win it with 180 electoral votes. John C. Breckinridge of the Southern Democrats finishes second with 72. John Bell and the Constitutional Union Party finishes third with 39 electoral votes. And Stephen A. Douglas and the Northern Democrats finished last with 12 electoral votes. In terms of the popular vote, it's going to be Lincoln in first place with 39.8%. Stephen A. Douglas in second place with 29.5% of the popular vote. Breckinridge is going to finish third with 18.1%. And Bell is going to finish last with 12.6%. If we take a look here at the electoral map, there's the electoral map. I hope you can see it pretty well. I'm going to turn up the brightness here. Here's the electoral map. Turn that brightness back off here. There we go. So if you can see it really well, there's the electoral map, and it's obvious that sectionalism is in play here. Lincoln is going to carry 18 states, and he does not gain any support from the South. He's going to carry the entirety of the North. He's going to carry the Midwest, and he's going to go out west and carry Oregon and California. Vice President Breckinridge, he's going to end up carrying 11 states. He carries Maryland, he carries Delaware, and he also carries the Deep South. Now, John Bell's only going to carry Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And Stephen A. Douglas, who was the only candidate to get votes in both free and slave states, he is only going to carry Missouri and split New Jersey with Lincoln. Now, as a result of this election, South Carolina, five and a half weeks after Lincoln's election, South Carolina secedes from the Union. Eventually, 6 other southern states would follow suit, and the month before Lincoln's inauguration in Montgomery, Alabama, the Confederate States of America is formed, and Jefferson Davis is elected their first president. Now, Abraham Lincoln didn't exactly have a smooth ride to Washington, because on his way to his inauguration, there was a plot which came to be known as the Baltimore plot, and that plot was someone was going to kill Lincoln by, at that point, who was the president-elect. So, to prevent Lincoln from dying before the inauguration, his security actually had to sneak him into Washington so he can be there for the inauguration, so he can get sworn in. The following, in April of 1861, April 12th, 1861, rebel forces, Confederate forces, attacked Fort Sumter. They end up taking the fort, and the Civil War is going to begin. We'll talk more about the Civil War in the election of 1864 next time. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. We are at the Civil War. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, go on ahead and watch those if you want. And with that, we will see you next time.